Welcome to the Revenue Throughput Podcast. I'm your host, Jose Palomino, and our guest today is Sean Hutchinson, partner in the Ready for Next Advisory Group. Sean is a true thought leader in business value acceleration and transition readiness. He's dedicated to the successful transition outcomes for business owners. He oversees a unique value accelerator program that includes in-depth discovery, 7 value domains, and decision support. And their programs help owners act today to create options for tomorrow, making them ready for next. So let's welcome Sean to the show. Welcome, Sean.
Hi, Jose.
Well, how are you these days?
Yeah, doing great. Thank you. Grateful that we haven't really, seen in my family or in our company, we haven't seen the effects of COVID. So we're really thankful for that. And we're also thankful for, health in our businesses. So, one thing that I'm a proponent of gratefulness. Yeah. And I think it's, I feel good about where we are.
Well, that's great. And that's great. I think, it's been such a tough year for so many people.
Sure has.
And many people even listening to this thinking, gee, are we out of it yet? And it's always waiting for the other shoe to drop and things
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
So it's good to hear good news.
Yeah.
And it seems like we're getting, it's almost like spring has sprung and, the sun's coming out and
Feels a little rejuvenating, a little renewal. It's always good. Yeah.
Sure. And of course,
good.
our hearts go out to those people who suffered losses. I think there's not
course.
anyone I've talked to who hasn't known somebody who's either been very sick or who actually died. And, so it's a real thing and that has affected so many people. And yet we move on because I think that's what and many of our loved ones would want us to. So that's really one of the things we're excited about is how do we build a better future? And so I was particularly excited about having this interview with you, Sean, because I know the work you do is really interesting and working with a lot of the same kind of people I work with, owners of businesses.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look out at the community of people you work with that you help, what would you say are some of like the biggest challenges they're facing, either right now or typically? Because when you formed the firm, you didn't form it for COVID, you formed it to provide a service that you thought would be necessary. So
Right.
what are some of those big challenges?
Yeah, so we work with business owners all over the United States, and a lot of the people that we're working with right now are baby boomer business owners. We call them 3BOs because we can't actually say that phrase over and over and over again. So without tying our tongues. So 3BOs, and I think one of the reasons why we're working a lot with them, they all own kind of middle market, mid-sized businesses, in a lot of different industries, and they've gotten to that time in their life where they have to make some big decisions. And for a business owner, it kind of comes down to the 3 biggest decisions probably that they'll ever make are, getting married, whether to have kids, and starting or ending a business, right? Exiting, getting in and getting out. And these are, really emotional decisions at the end of the day. They all kind of tie into that area where you have to be in touch with, what your needs and your desires, not just what your business is doing. So we wrap the human and the business together. I think what they're struggling the most with right now, and it might be a point in time issue, but we've also seen it pre-COVID, is really 2 issues that I would say are tied together. So clarity is a big deal, and clarity is worth a lot, as you know, right? So, but it's hard to find that in today's world. It's kind of, a lot of business owners are in geez, I don't really know what to do next. And I don't know if that would be a big mistake. This has been a very difficult time, but this is something that we've seen before too. And side by side with clarity is the need to be agile. And I think we have learned over the last year or so how important it is to be agile with decision making, with strategy, with trying to leverage your resources really efficiently in any given way within the business or in the market. So that's one of the things that we're seeing our clients struggle with or grapple with, maybe and grapple authentically with it. I don't think anybody would say, if they were being really honest about it, that I have total clarity on what to do today, tomorrow, next week. But that's worth a lot. And that's one of the things that we've been working with clients. We've been working hard with them on achieving clarity and agility.
So it's interesting because you mentioned your clients. So I'm assuming maybe you run into folks that could be clients. I mean, they could fall into that middle market
Yeah.
category in a variety of,
Mhm.
industries and so on,
Yeah.
who aren't, they may be a little shell shocked by
Yeah.
what everything. So,
I think that's
uh,
true.
so what would you say to somebody who says, "Listen, I'm just trying to make it through like this month, next month, this year,"
Yeah.
and you're talking about things that sound pretty strategic, pretty long term.
Yeah.
I just can't get my head wrapped around it.
Right. Right. I'm just trying to survive today. Right. I'm just trying to get to tomorrow. I'm just trying to figure out what's going to happen. One of the things that I think an owner could do and maybe should do, right? I don't want to come across as judgy on this, like, oh, you really ought to be doing this and you'd just be better off if you did. I don't really think that's, I mean, everybody has respect. We bring something to the table. They bring a lot to the table.
Mm.
They know more about their business than we will ever know in our lifetime. So what we want to do is find a way to add value. I think one of the things that we can do for an owner that might feel that, I don't know if I'd call it panic, or that the world has somehow become completely opaque and there isn't any way to kind of see through this noise, if you want to call it that,
Right.
um, is to we can be a partner in helping them think through those things. We can be an accountability partner, but we can be people who really, help them, I think, connect with uh, a more empirical way of looking at business. In other words, one of the things that I've always found comforting in difficult, really chaotic times is to be able to step back and say, okay, what evidence are we looking at here? What are the data points that we need to sort of calmly address? Are we actually seeing the world as it is? Right? It kind of goes back to cognitive behavioral therapy for business owners in a sense. When we're talking to them and they're saying, oh my God, here's the layout as I see it, and there is no good news in here, right? I'm in a total panic. I'm really emotional about this. And you can acknowledge that, I think, as an advisor to the owner, while also saying, is that really what's happening here? Can we just kind of step back and pick this apart a little bit? And it's not an adversarial conversation. It's more just a, let's see if we can help bring some perspective that might just, part the clouds a little bit. And I think that going towards evidence, going toward data, if you don't have any, go get it, right? Deploy some resources to actually try to figure out what's going on here. If you're feeling, like you're competitively disadvantaged, let's go get some data that either says you are or says you aren't. Let's be open to wherever that path may lead. And then when we get something that we can sort of look at more objectively, right? Let's see what that does for us at that point. So we're living in two truths at the same time. We have to acknowledge that we're living in a very emotional time for business owners. Very, very, I wouldn't say scary. I'd say terrifying in a sense. Like, oh my God, especially our clients. You have to keep in mind, if you're working with baby boomers, they're now at the end of a cycle that started with the Great Recession, right? So 2007, 2008, this started to hit them. It took them a long time to kind of climb out of that hole. Then their businesses got back to sort of the point that they were at. And that was a long trough. And it looked like maybe growth after we kind of came out of it. But if you trace it, it took them a long time to get back to where they were in 2000. Then they start growing again, whatever that might look like. And then they get to COVID and they're what, 14 years older, 13 years older, and they still haven't done a whole lot of planning. They still haven't had the opportunity to kind of stop and say, all right, where am I headed with this? I've got to make a plan of some sort around transition. I need to be focused on building enterprise value, building transferability in my business. But here they are 13 or 14 years later, and they're thinking to themselves, this is the second huge economic event that I have been through in the last 10 to 15 years, and I need to de-risk. I can't go through this again. That can be a really sort of a bad place to be. Okay, what's next? Stopping, breathing, bringing in a partner who can actually help just kind of box this in a way that provides some clarity, that brings great comfort. It's a peace of mind that they
Right.
haven't
So
had in a long time.
now, Sean, you described this as a path. It's a journey, right? So
Yeah,
you're
it
starting.
is.
So So let's say somebody's listening to this right now and they say, okay, I'm not anywhere near ready to bring in anybody yet, but
Yeah.
what would be maybe one or two or even three good kind of, let's call them self-check questions that they
Yeah.
can ask themselves that might help them sense where are they in this? Maybe give them a little bit of a glimmer of clarity just by a good question that they can ask themselves.
Yeah. That's a great way to look at it. So one of the things that we have is a tool actually that we call the owner readiness scorecard. It's actually 10 questions. What I think let's just sort of frame this conceptually. So there's this great concept that, in my experience has been a little bit of a revelation for business owners when they kind of approach this point where they've got to make a decision about keeping their business, continuing, selling their business, or transitioning it to somebody else. It could be internal to employees or management. It could be sell it to a third party. We in our business we don't have a dog in that hunt. I mean, we don't care whether they sell it to a third party. There's preparation that goes on regardless of where they think that pathway is going to take them. So they got that big keep or sell decision that's kind of front of mind for them and how they can bring it down. But there's a planning concept called three legs of the stool, and it's so simple. It's really, really easy to understand. But what it says is there's three things that you need to be thinking about in this holistic planning model, and you can consider each one of these to be a leg of a stool. And if any one of them is sort of out of whack, then the stool is just going to fall over, right?
Okay.
So the first piece is optimize the value of your business. And there's a whole host of business issues that go into that, waste, productivity, financial acceleration, sales, marketing, strategy, how the culture and leadership of the organization is doing. So that's a rich area, optimizing the value of the business. Tied to that is the personal financial readiness. And a lot of times what you're doing in the value optimization is tied to what your personal financial planning might say. As an example, an owner does a financial plan, and surprisingly few do this, by the way. A comprehensive updated financial plan, the business is their biggest asset. It's the thing that represents both the biggest opportunity, the biggest risk for them. So if it's not ready to monetize, if they can't harvest what they've invested in it and more, that can really affect their retirement plan, whatever that might look like. And so if the financial advisor that does the financial plan says, look, your business is worth 10, but your financial plan says you need to harvest it at 20. How are you going to get that 10 million? Because that's in a relatively short period of time. You're probably not going to get it out of the equity markets. You'll get something maybe, but it could be very volatile.
Yeah, and
At
especially
least,
when you describe the recession till now, like
yeah,
there's the X factors. The market works. I mean, the broad market, the world is still rolling forward. So yes, you need to double the value of your business, but you're doing this in a context where you can't control these externalities.
that's right. And you have to also remember that in any private business, you own a liquid security, right? It's not like you can just go sell it to somebody else. It doesn't turn into a dollar overnight or in the next minute like the equity markets do.
Right.
So you got to really prepare for that. It's a very difficult security to transition to somebody else. So that represents a massive, asset risk, asset concentration for any business owner. I think entrepreneurs are sort of, if they're not directly aware of this, they are certainly peripherally aware of it, right? On the edge, that they hold something that can be really valuable. It's probably given them a lot of income, right, in their life, but they haven't quite turned the corner on, oh, that's an investment asset. I need to treat it that way. It's just like everything else that I own on the pie chart, but it represents a really big part of that. And therefore, I need to consider whether I'm going to keep investing in it, how am I investing, what's the use of capital, right? My personal capital has to be used in a certain way. So those two things, those two legs, the personal financial readiness and planning, which is estate tax, financial planning, and then also value optimization. But then there's this third leg of the stool, which is so crucial, the psychological, both psychological and tactical. If I exit my business, who am I going to be? Now, a lot of that, a lot of times that will be expressed as, so life after business, what are you, pardon me, what are you going to do with your life after business? We say, who are you going to be? The doing part of it comes out of the being part of it, right? So how would you express your identity after you're not a business owner anymore? And business owners have been business owners, if they're baby boomers, maybe 30, 40, 50 years even. This is what they've done daily. That's how they're known in the community. That's where they're like, I'm the dad of that guy. I own a business. It's amazing how it just sort of circulates as their primary identity. And it can get out of whack, right? We know work-life balance can be a real issue for a lot of business owners. So if those three things together contain a multitude of questions, right?
So I could
For
see,
instance,
Sean, for example, on that third one, that really struck a, rang my bell as I listened to it as a business owner myself.
yeah,
Because you're right. I mean, when you work heart and soul on what you're doing, so much of how you see yourself is through a prism of your business. And I know from working with owners for, well over a decade now as well, few ask that question. It can feel a little, maybe especially, and this may be a little generalization, baby boomers, but it could
mhm,
feel a little touchy feely hoo ha to ask that
okay,
question.
yeah.
Yet it's actually a real thing. And I can imagine a lot of owners just ignore that one. They say, listen, get me the value, improve my balance sheet. I'll be good. I'll figure it out.
I'll figure it out when you give me the money.
When you give me the
That's what
money.
you just give me the money and I'll worry about that later. Yeah,
So what do you
absolutely.
see as some of the, let's just take for the sake of argument, that person, that hypothetical needed 10, they increased the value of the business, they got 20. What does not addressing that third leg do? I mean, as a practical
Uh,
matter, what have you seen?
yeah, what have I seen? So, PricewaterhouseCoopers does a regular survey on, entrepreneurship, and in particular, organized around transition readiness or studying post transition, how business owners are doing. And I don't remember when the last one was done. The results over the years have been fairly consistent. And what it shows is that those owners without a plan, right, that go into retirement or whatever their next act is going to be. We say retirement for a lot of business owners, they don't think of it as retirement. It's just sort of what I do next, but it's very fuzzy in a lot of cases because that be versus do question has not been answered. So what PwC found is that when they surveyed about 1,000 business owners who had exited their business about a year earlier, that 75% of them profoundly regretted the decision. That is exactly the language, profoundly regretted the decision to exit their business 12 to, a few months later. When they asked the owners about that, it wasn't it didn't have anything to do with money. It didn't have anything to do with what they got. In fact, a lot of them were surprised they got as much money as they did out of the
Okay.
business. It was because they just didn't know who they were. They had done no life after business. Now, what would that feel like to me? Let me put it in that I would be completely unmoored. But as one of my friends said, the day after you sell your business, you really need a reason to set the alarm clock the next morning. Like, what are you going to wake up to? What are you going to have to do that day that actually has meaning, that's purpose? We have a lot of owners will say, well, I'm just going to play golf for a while. I'm going to spend more time with my grandkids. That sounds really good. And about 6 months into that, you may still be enjoying it, but it's really not meaning and purpose. It's a doing. I would say spending time with the grandkids is closer to meaning and purpose, and be able to do those things
Sure.
and connect with them emotionally in ways that you just couldn't when you didn't have the time. So that can be great, but you still have to do some things for yourself when you're being, a grandparent. You're focused on the grandkids, not necessarily your heart and your soul. So you're right. A lot of owners will say, I don't know if I want to touch that. But look, a lot of us on this planet suffer to a certain extent with not being in touch with our emotions, not actually investigating more about who we are and what we care about. I think that's maybe particularly true of owners because they've never had to. The identity as an entrepreneur has sort of been handed to them. They're successful in that way. They made that decision. They were successful in their pursuit of being a business owner. Now what? Right? Now, what could happen? I've seen marriages ruined. I've seen people descend into substance abuse. I've just completely lost.
And this is coming off of the high point of their success. I mean,
Exactly. It's like I had this big check in my pocket. I can
right.
now do almost anything that I want to do, and stuff that I've only dreamt about. Why am I feeling so empty? Why is this happening? And money is not the answer. It doesn't cure all ills, so to speak, right? It never has. So then it becomes a question of I think it becomes a question for a lot of people of not just who am I going to be, but I got all this money. what am I going to do with that to sort of leave a mark on the world, right? Am I just going to buy more stuff for myself? No, that's not going to fill a hole. That's not going to save my marriage. That's not going to keep me from becoming an alcoholic if I was running down that road at all. It's really about, I'm in a special position, a unique position, I think, where I'm actually a wealthy person as a result of what I did for the last 40 years. I should feel good about that, but who am I going to be in the community, and how can I help other people be successful? Now, there are folks that don't care about that at all. And I think those are the folks probably that are most at risk. So that third leg of the stool, we always say that third leg of the stool, without that, you're really at risk, personally and otherwise. And then, who wants to be unhappy for the rest of their life?
Well, yeah, and I think you've described to perhaps the more classic, like industrial business owner who is a baby boomer now, let's say, as opposed to, let's say, the high-tech serial entrepreneur who they know what they're going to do. They're going to sell a business, start another one.
Yeah,
But they're in their 30s or 40s, and they have a lot more, runway
That's
to
right.
do that. But
That's right. And I do think that there's a different, in a younger generation, there is definitely a different kind of set of values, not better or worse, just a set of values around work-life balance. But that's partially, I think, because they saw what's happening in front of them. They're learning from the generation that preceded them, and they're trying to emulate what they think works, mimic, in other words, that incredible entrepreneurialism of the baby boomer generation. I mean, they have driven the American economy. They've driven it hard. They've driven it successfully. And then, the generations behind them are learning from some of the challenges that they've had and some of the successes. We luckily have visibility into that, I think, because we have visibility these days into almost everything. We can figure out what the baby boomer ate for breakfast yesterday if we really want to. 40 years ago, they didn't have that kind of instant community, that instant learning community. They couldn't crowdsource a problem solving. I mean, it's amazing. It's interesting that I had a conversation some time ago with a guy who he was probably 65, 70 at the time. He was, I would call him the classic 3 martini entrepreneur consultant, right? So these are the guys. He was a senior guy with PwC, as a matter of fact. And his thing was, I go to lunch, I have 3 martinis. That's how I form relationships with people. It was very old school. He was also in the camp of, hey, one of the ways that we make money as consultants on an hourly fee is to actually work slower, right? Just kind of build up that. And we don't like that, right? But he had some young people that were working for him. He gave one that he called a millennial with some disdain, that I gave him this project. And I knew it was going to take him 40 hours to do it, right? It was a big problem, needed to be solved. 8 hours later, the millennial comes back to him and says, I'm done. I got it. And he thinks to himself, there's no way that this guy has got to be sloppy. He looks at the product. The guy's got it. He did it. Now, what did he do? He didn't go back in and sort of put his head down and open the books and kind of start making notes on it. He went right out to his social community, online social community, and said, this is what I'm dealing with. Does anybody know how to solve this problem? And 8 hours later, he had a huge amount of instant input. He was able to synthesize all of that into a solution in 20% of the time that it traditionally would have taken. Now, what was the older guy's reaction to that? It wasn't, I got to learn from that guy because we can do a whole lot more with less if we're that productive. His reaction was, slow down, pal. You didn't hit the 40 hour at $500 an hour mark. So, don't do that again because it doesn't fit the business model. So it was a really stark contrast for me.
And that also tells you, like, business models are going to change. Like, everything's and this is true since Og made the wheel, right? Like,
and that goes back to the agility that I was talking about in the beginning, clarity and agility. That was an older guy who was absolutely not agile. He was locked in. Right.
And it's interesting that I've had the good fortune of working with some older entrepreneurs who are still sharp as a tack, trying to change, adapt, and they're successful. So, it's just fascinating how this world is challenges you to really think about a lot of very profound things. And Sean, you've given us such incredible insights and I think some real takeaways for our listeners. And if somebody wanted to know more about your work and what you do, where should they go? And I'll include this in the show notes, but I'd like you to just say it
Yeah, yeah,
so they
yeah.
know.
So, we're three companies operating under the same brand, which is Ready for Next. So we have the advisory group, we have the online academy, and then we have a cities program where we work with communities on big transition readiness and value acceleration initiatives at scale to work on community sort of continuity and stability. Because look, if the baby boomer business segment kind of destabilizes in any given city, things get tough because they hold a lot of the
Okay.
economic
That
cards
makes a
right
lot of
there
sense. Sure.
with not a whole lot of planning. So we're in a very important, we sort of say you're standing on a burning platform, you better, heat's getting hotter, we need to do something. So those three things combine into what we call the amusement park. And our idea is a business owner could kind of come through the gate of the business of the amusement park and find what they need in one way or another, right? If they need advisory services, it's there. If they want to do online education, so on and so. If they want to connect with people in their community, all available to them. So the best place to find all of that is readyfornext.com. That portal will lead you to where you feel like you need to go in a self-directed way. If you're seeking education, go to the academy, right? If you're exploring, there are resources there. If you want to talk to an advisor, go to the advisory group. Look around, just kind of wander around a little bit and see what resonates. Our thing is go to the client where they are. We're not trying to lasso anybody, sort of drag them over into, yeah, you need consulting services, you need what we've got. We want to provide something that's meaningful to the owner in that moment, understanding that people move sort of at their own pace and in their own way. We have to accommodate that.
No, that's fantastic, Sean. So, once again, just on behalf of me and our listeners, thank you so much for what you've added to this conversation. And I'm
Yeah,
sure it's food for
pleasure.
thought for many people who are hearing these principles and thinking, like, am I, to use your company name, am I ready for next?
Yeah, yeah,
So, with
that's
that,
right.
Sean, thanks again. Really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
pleasure. Thank you, Jose.